Sign up at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast or hit the join button on YouTube to partake in Unfound's new video series. Brianna Alexandria Maitland was a 17-year-old from Montgomery, Vermont. She worked 2 jobs and lived with a friend. On the night of March 19th, 2004, Brianna left work at 11:20 p.m. 40 minutes later, witnesses saw Brianna's car backed up against an abandoned house. Brianna wasn't there. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. Almost 8 years into this podcast's existence, I continue to give my ego a lot of credit because I continue to still be astounded and humbled by the disappearances I get to feature and the people I get to know. So many missing persons cases that seemed so far away to me when I took an interest in them before I became a true crime host have found a home at this podcast, Unfound. For example, there's no way I could have known back in 1995, when Jody Husentroot went missing, that I would become friends with one of the foremost experts on her case, Caroline Lowe. How I've gotten to know Jeff Wise, the expert on Flight 370, who has become an excellent acquaintance. And following Brian Schaefer's disappearance like I did in the late 2000s, no way I could have known Kelly Bruce Kochnour would become such a friend that she invited me to her wedding. Seriously, when I think about this and all the other disappearances I knew about before starting Unfound, it's crazy. It really is. Well, today with Brianna Maitland, this happens again. A young woman and her disappearance that I didn't think I would ever get to present to all of you is happening. Hey, never say never. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, charleyproject.org. Brianna Maitland's life has pretty much been an open book since she went missing over 20 years ago. However, there's a lot of disinformation out there, so I'll keep it simple. Brianna had no addictions. She and her parents got along fine, although Brianna did become distressed when she thought they might split up. Yes, Brianna did not have the same roof over her head all the time, but no matter where she was, the people wanted her there. And in fact, the last place Brianna lived was her best place yet. True, Brianna might have been having some boy problems in the months leading up to her disappearance, but nothing that was out of the ordinary for a 17-year-old. So, on March 19th, 2004, Brianna was at one of her jobs. She left work at about 11:20 p.m. There is no reason to believe she had any other plans than to go home. However, Brianna never made it there. Just 40 minutes later, passers-by saw her car backed into the side of an abandoned house no more than a mile from Brianna's work. Not until 13 hours later did a police officer show up to survey the scene. A variety of items were strewn on the ground, including a broken necklace. And not until a few days later did anyone truly realize Brianna was missing. She was never seen again. Searches yielded nothing pertaining to Brianna, although the keys to her car are still missing. Unlike murders, disappearances often present us with the first problem of determining whether someone committed a crime or not. This often results in people's imaginations running a bit more wildly than you would ever see when the victim is visible and the method of death is known. Contemplate what we can do to control our creative sides when analyzing disappearances, while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, what do you make of a lime allegedly being found on the trunk of Brianna's car? Number 2, how is it possible to say foul play occurred when there are no signs that any other person or vehicle was on that property that night? And number 3, no 17-year-old would ever stage that scene, right? Brianna's family greatly leans toward the idea that someone harmed her that night. The guest for this episode is the private investigator for the Maitland family, Greg Overacker. Unfound News. I've started an occasional video series now available for premium Patreon and YouTube supporters. The first one is the top 10 unfound disappearances most difficult to analyze. If you'd like to partake in this new series, please sign up at either location. Next, please be looking for an announcement that assistants Emily and Carrie will be hosting a meetup in Kansas City, Missouri sometime in June. Do not pass up the opportunity to mingle with other Unfound listeners. Finally, although she was not the guest for the episode, the mother of Travis Robertson died recently. Please send thoughts and prayers in that family's direction. Before the interview starts, I'll remind you that I will be doing a summation, in fact, quite a long summation for my interview with Greg Overacker. But if you'd like a more in-depth, even more in-depth analysis of the disappearance of Brianna Maitland, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the private investigator for the Maitland family, Greg Overacker. Greg, welcome to Unfound.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great, and just so everybody knows, Greg and I are doing this interview on May 7th of 2024. So we're going to talk about Brianna's disappearance, and before we're all done, Greg, we also have to talk about the book that you've written. We certainly want to talk about that, what motivated you to write it, where people can find it, etc. Later in our discussion today. But first, we're just going to start with a little bit about you. As much as you want to say, or as little as you want to say, give the people a little flavor of who Greg is, your background, anything you want to say right now.
Well, it's an odd conversation. I'll let you ask questions throughout. How's that?
Yeah.
So in my mid-20s, I started bounty hunting. I started working for bail bondsmen. So I would travel up and down the East Coast, pick up bail skips for bail bondsmen. So what I did was I started advertising nationwide. Kind of how that business works. I would advertise nationwide. I would. This was old school. This was the old days. I would send away for phone books for Yellow Pages, and I would take the Yellow Pages and I would send ads to everyone in that city or whatever, and I would try to blanket states, and then I would get like a 1% to 4% return. And what would happen was bondsmen from other states, I'm in New York, would ask me to bring their skips back to them. So I'm in upstate New York. People would call me from like New Jersey and say, I have someone in Syracuse. I have someone I believe is in Albany. Can you bring them back to me? So they would send me, and this was before computers. So you would do faxes, or we overnight stuff to each other, but they would send me the contracts and all that good stuff, everything done by phone. And I would pick the person up and take them back. That's kind of how that works. They don't want to come up and look around for somebody, so they would pay you to pick them up and bring them down there, or check to see if they were here, things like that. So I did that for years, and I ended up working for a PI in New Jersey, still do. And after a while, that kind of gets old. There's a lot of travel. There's a lot, you're on the road all the time. you're away from home. You're here at home, and people would say, well, especially if you're in a relationship or something, well, when are you gonna be back? I don't know. I'm just leaving. I'll be back when I get back, kind of thing. So that gets old. And I just decided, I got married in 2000 for a very short time, so I gave it up. But then when the marriage was over, it didn't last too long. I did work again for some of my old clients and stuff, but a lot of them had moved on, and I wasn't really super anxious to get back into it full time again anyway. I did it sporadically for a while, part time for a while, and I still would if somebody had asked me. If an old client called me and asked me, I would. But I ended up having a process serving business. I did auto repossessions. I did all kinds of stuff.
Wow.
And I did PI work. And so now, specifically, the only PI work that I do is for Bruce Maitland, Brianna Maitland's father.
Okay.
Occasionally, there will be cases that I'll work on with Lou Berry. Lou Berry is the other private investigator that works for Bruce Maitland.
Yep.
I came on board with Bruce in 2006. Lou came on board in 2016. Lou is in Massachusetts, and he's a private investigator there. He's a 35-year former law enforcement police chief. He's retired now. He's a PI. So I'll work with him, and we've done a few high-profile cases. One in particular that we work on regularly. But that's it. Other than that, I process certain business.
Okay. I have to ask about, once again, I don't have any law enforcement background or anything, but when I think about bail bonds and everything, I think of that being kind of, tracking down people who I guess jump bail, kind of a dangerous job. I mean, is that public perception of that true or what?
Yeah, it's an odd way to make a living. So I think different people in different parts of the country have a different experience with that. If I had lived in LA or any metropolitan area or an area down south where there were a few cities nearby each other, so my experience might have been a lot different. Where I am in upstate New York, I'm about an hour away from Albany and an hour away from Syracuse, dead between the two. But in bail bonds, it wasn't a huge thriving thing in New York State. Yes, it was here, it was active and all that other stuff, but comparatively, there were states like New Jersey where you would go into a town like, Patterson or Newark, and there was, 1,000 bail bonds, where here in Albany, there would be, 5 or 4.
Yeah.
So it was a lot different. So I traveled a lot. It wasn't the kind of thing where I could make a living in my backyard. Now there might be guys who, in LA that work in their own city all the time, so they can have a normal life and do it and stuff. I couldn't. I had to be on the road. So it got exhausted.
I bet.
I couldn't keep up. But yeah, it was a kind of thing where, that was an old expression too that you would hear, that it was 95% boredom and 5% because
right
at some point you're going to meet your target, and that was another thing too, where guys in the business who were no good at it would get phased out of their own volition, because if they couldn't find their target, they couldn't make any money. You're not getting paid unless you find them. So they would just go away. They couldn't do it. So if you were good at it and you could come across who you needed to come across, then you had to deal with that when you got to it. Right. But it was an experience. It taught me a lot. I was from a little town, and I didn't travel a lot. And when I did travel as a kid, it was to control destinations with my parents and stuff like that. So the fact that I just went and got in the car and started doing this crazy stuff and going all over the place and figuring it out as I went, kind of thing. I worked with some really professional people. I was fortunate in that aspect. I worked with some people along the line who were not, and that business kind of attracts those people. It's always kind of functioned in the gray, which is interesting. Different states went to licensing. So New York State eventually went to licensing. And what they ended up doing was, if you were a PI, you were kind of grandfathered in. But if you weren't, you had to get licensing through the state. To my knowledge, there's no one licensed with the state, never has been. But there's people operating because they allow bail bonds to make their own arrests, bail bondsmen. They allow bondsmen from other states to come in and make their own arrests. In other words, if they sign the contract with the defendant, or if you're a PI. And so I operated as a PI, so I could do it.
Right.
So they kind of can't keep really super accurate stats because there are guys operating like a virus they don't never know about. And you know, we would go back then. We would go into states that didn't have any licensing whatsoever. That's changed a lot. So we would refer to it as open country. So when you called somebody, you know, now everything's at your fingertips. Of course, you want to know something, you know, whether it's to do with the gun laws or the bail arrest laws, you just look it up.
Yep.
Back then, you would have to start making phone calls. Call Department of State, you call whoever, the police, whatever, state police or something like that. And then you don't know really if you're getting accurate information. You might get the wrong cop on the phone. They're not going to do homework for you. You know what I mean? So luckily, there was an organization, a national association set up, and you could refer to them and they would help you out. And they would send newsletters to you and they would tell you, basically, you're functioning on behalf of an insurance company. Bail bondsmen are just insurance agents.
Okay.
And they were agents working for a mother company. So they would say, oh, they work for Diamond or they work for Lincoln or whatever, these different big insurance companies. But, you know, they would say, if I would call people and say, you know, tell me about whatever state I have to go there. They'd say, oh, it's open country, meaning there's no state laws there pertaining to it. Now, of course, you have to abide by, you know, people's civil rights. You can't, you know, you're going to take someone's freedom away. You have to treat them properly and all that good stuff. But it was interesting, and especially when you were going state to state to state to state, and you're carrying a firearm. You know, that could get a little sketchy.
It can, sure, sure. Especially if it's state, you know, just I know from my own gun ownership here in Florida, you know, gun ownership here in Florida is a lot different than it is in New York, for example.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah,
right.
As I can remember being in a bail bond office in North Carolina. We went down there in Raleigh, and we were looking for someone. We were kind of stuck in a bad spot, and I said, you know what? Bail bondsmen know everybody. They know all the bad guys in your city. They do. So we went in the office and started asking, Ron, you guys familiar with this guy or whatever? But anyway, during that whole conversation, one of them walked out and he put I'm pretty sure it was a MAC-10 on the couch there, and some other firearms. And he was getting ready to head out. He was like grabbing a briefcase. He had all these guns. And I said, you can carry that? He said, if you own it, you can carry it. I said, really? He was, yep. I said, any special? Nope. You own it, you can carry it. And then he said to me, if they pull you over, the police pull you over, you make sure you take your gun out and put it on the seat. I said, are you messing with me? Are you trying to get me killed? He goes, no, you pull it out and put it on the seat. So when he walks up, he can see it. I said, you want me, when a cop pulls me over, to reach in and pull out a firearm and put it loaded on my seat?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the smartest thing to do.
I don't think I'm going to be doing that. Yeah. But there was a lot of things, you know, I was a young guy too. There was a lot of things that were sketchy that I was catching up to speed on. But but it was an experience, and I learned a lot, and I met a lot of crazy people, and some people are still in my life to this day. A couple of people are no longer with us. But yeah, it was an experience, and I learned a lot.
Okay. When you were doing that, was there something, of course, you're, 20 years now, Brianna's been missing for 20 years. You've been working on her disappearance for a large majority of those years. But before her disappearance came along, were there any disappearances that kind of caught your attention, maybe living in that part of the United States? Or was that kind of something that was just in the background because of the work you were doing? Were you kind of keeping an eye on, you know what, I might like to get involved in trying to solve a disappearance, or what, while you were doing this?
So I spent a lot of time at police stations up and down the East Coast. Well, a lot of different places, but I would go in these police stations and jails and stuff like that. And there would be walls of missing people posters. And it just always blew me away. Now I was so preoccupied with other stuff that I didn't have time for that. When I ended up seeing, it was Father's Day, 2006. My daughter and I were on the Thruway, and we went into a rest stop on the New York State Thruway, and she had to use the restroom, and I was on her like a hawk, and I she went in the restroom and I stood outside the door, and there was the posters there, and I saw it among others. And I don't know why I glued to Brianna's, but I did. And my daughter memorized the material, the contact information. So when I got home, I could contact somebody. I think at that point, I was looking for something else. I just, like I said, that being on the road like that, chasing after it, there's only so long you can do that.
Yeah.
First of all, it's kind of a young man's game, but how long can you do that, get away with it? At some point, you're going to meet something bad.
If I can ask, at that point in 2006, like Father's Day, when you first came across, her poster or flyer in this rest stop, how long had you been doing the bail bondsman work at that point? How long was it before you started thinking,
I have to think about that. I started in my mid-20s. I have to think about it. I never really thought about it. So what, 14 years?
For 13, right? 14 years, you were into it. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
What I did was that was a whole learning part in the beginning too. I got work pretty quickly when I was young. I mean, I went out and advertised. I took some classes. I advertised. I joined the National Association. I started getting work. I started meeting other people. I started networking. I started going down to New Jersey and working with the guy that I went to work with down there. That was quite an experience. And he and I would go to, yearly conferences and stuff like that, because he was a bail bondsman too, and a PI and stuff like that. But they'd have these yearly organizations, like in Las Vegas, they would have PBUS, Professional Bail Agents of the United States, would have their yearly conference or whatever. So a lot of the bondsmen would bring their bounty hunters because they had classes there, and they would pay for their classes. That's what happened to me. And he paid for me to go through all these things, so that if you did get called into court and had to go on the stand or something, you had credentials. You had, you could discuss your job and stuff like that.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I think at that point, I was kind of looking for something else to do.
Okay.
And that was something that really interested me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So 2006, Father's Day. So Father's Day is in June every year of 2006. So a little over 2 years since she went missing. You see this poster. Your daughter nicely remembers the contact information.
Yeah.
And how was that first conversation? If you feel free, of course, I'm not asking for any private conversations that you've had between yourself and Brianna's family. But if you just generally remember you contacting them, how did they react? How did that go initially there in the summer of 2006?
So I contacted class kids. Who I think their information was on the poster. So Class Kids was started by Mark Klaas, Polly Klaas's father. Polly was abducted by, I think his name was Richard Allen Davis, in Petaluma, California, in maybe 1993 or three, maybe. She was abducted right out of her basement and murdered. So her father, Mark, started this organization. It later split into two organizations. He lost control of one of them. So there's Class Kids and there's the Polly Klaas Foundation. I can't remember which one it has control of now, but they were great. They put me through to the Maitlands. So initially, when she went missing, Class Kids showed up and did a professional search, which, everyday people don't know how to do a professional search. You know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
So they showed up, they run it, they truly helped them, and a lot of people in that area showed up to help, which, made them feel loved and cared about as their neighbors, their community came out to help them. They handled the media and dealing with the police and stuff like that. But, after they do what they do, they fold up and they leave.
Yeah.
They did correspond with them after that and stuff like that. But anyway, they put me in touch with the Maitlands, and they basically said, look, this PI is showing interest, and he'd like to help you out if he could. So I drove to, Maitlands had left Vermont. So about 2 years after Brianna's disappearance, they said we had to get some kind of normalcy in our life. So They went just outside the news coverage area where people wouldn't really know who they were. And then that way they could come back and, deal with the police, do interviews, whatever they needed to do, and then go back. They didn't have to see it on the nightly news, all that stuff. It got to be a thing where I remember Brianna's mom telling me, she goes, every day my day would start with, I would go like to McDonald's or something, get a coffee, and the girl would look out the window and give me my coffee, give me a look, a forlorn look, and I'm sorry. And she goes, that went on all day long. I'd see people in the store and they'd say, I'm so sorry. She goes, I just couldn't take it anymore.
Right.
So they moved to Governor, New York. So I drove up there and sat with them in their farmhouse. Because of what they had been through, they had, driveway alarms, and they had dogs and stuff. They lived on kind of like a gentleman's farm. And they basically went through the story with me, and I was dumbfounded. I mean, there was so much information. Yeah. And they suspected everyone. And there was so many rumors, and they were perplexed. So they laid everything out for me. And I said, okay. And I went home, and they put me in touch with Hank Albarelli, who was a journalist who lived in the area. He actually was born and raised in Burlington, but he lived in Richford, which is right where Brianna went missing, near there. But his wife lived in Florida, so he went back and forth. And his daughter lived in London, so he went back and forth there too. But anyway, he had written, right when I met him, he wrote 2 really good articles on Brianna Maitland and Maura Murray. He helped me get up to speed. I went up there. I took a guy that I was working with at the time for the first, I think, 1 or 2 times. And then I just did it myself. But they were, the first meeting with them, if that was your question, was interesting. It was overwhelming. I mean,
were you maybe a little intimidated? Once again, you talk, of course, a lot of people know about her disappearance. There is a lot of information. In fact, there's still a lot of information, of course, 20 years later. A little intimidating, maybe a little bit, kind of trying to process everything. Or could you rely on some of that, the bail bonds experience to try to maybe sort things in your mind? Or was it like a little, at least initially, like, man, what am I going to do here?
I'm thinking, I'll do what I always do, which I'll take this information, I'll take it home, I'll soak it up, separate it the way I want it. Everybody has their own way. Yeah. Putting stuff down and getting it straight. And I'll make sense of it. And then I'll start with what I prioritize stuff and start from there. I just didn't realize, it's a big difference between chasing somebody down. Now, I got accustomed to finding somebody who's running among hundreds of thousands or a million other people is difficult. But there's certain things, if make it a whole lot easier. This is different. Yeah. This isn't someone that's running, trying to hide and fade in and out of their life and staying in touch with family and stuff like that. And they're just trying to stay out of jail. Right. This is a whole lot different. So I ended up, I realized over the years, I'm not a cop. I wasn't trained as a police officer. I was in over my head, even though I think I could chase people with some of the best of them at times. And back when I was in it, I was good at it. This was different. So what I did was, the Maitlands didn't really have anybody in their corner other than they had the police, of course, which they, if you read the book, it kind of explains it was very difficult for years with them and the police. They butted heads a lot. So having me there meant a lot to them. So what I did was I took the role of, I was going to gather any information I could get, bank it correctly with integrity and constructively. And that way, if it ever got to the point where I needed to pass the baton, I could give it to someone and they could look at it and say, okay, now I have all the information I need, because time is passing and it had to be recorded. It had, you know what I mean? And at the time, Brianna's case wasn't popularized. It wasn't a big deal. I mean, people didn't really know about it. It was a weird thing. So, you're talking before podcasts. So this, when you refer to, like, when we'll get more into Maura Murray's in a little bit, but
later, absolutely. We want to talk
Yeah,
about
so
that.
Maura Murray's and her disappearance were right in the same time frame. Maura was February 9th, 2004. Brianna was March 19th, 2004.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you'll hear people say about Maura's case is that her case was the first case to be popularized by social media. It was the first case because Facebook was launched that month, I think. So Brianna's really didn't have a lot of exposure for those 2 years. Hank put out a couple of newspaper articles, but they weren't picked up nationwide. They were, northern Vermont articles.
Okay.
So that changed over time.
Sure did.
The Maitlands did some shows, television shows, and I couldn't even name them now. And Bruce, even her father, even can't remember them all now. But I think he did Montel Williams. He did some others. But he said it got to the point where he's like not doing any more television shows. They're abusing us. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, we'll get down there and they want us to cry. You can tell they want us to cry for that little 4-minute segment we're going to do.
Yes.
He said, I'm not doing that. They want to help me. They can help me, but I'm not doing that.
Right.
So he would call me up and he would say, do you want to do this show for us? And I'd say, what's the show? And he'd tell me, and I'd say, I don't know, say what they were, but I'd say, do you want me to? He'd say, not really. Well, no, fuck him. I'm not doing it then, because he didn't respect him.
Mm-hmm.
So the show that we did do was Disappeared. And I think it's
the series that did many disappearances over many years.
Yeah.
Very popular. Yes. Okay.
Is that still on, by the way?
I don't think not any new episodes recently. I don't think so. I was a big fan of that show when it was on, but I don't think it within the last couple of years. I don't think so.
Okay. So oddly, I haven't talked to him about it in a while, but I'm pretty close to the producer that made that show. That when I put the book out, he reconnected with me and stuff. But I think he talked to the Maitlands, and the Maitlands said, this sounds like it's reputable. So they called me and said, will you do the show? So I did that. And they also had done Maura's already. But then it started to gain momentum. And then as time went on, it got a little more popularized. And then when Lou Berry came in 2016, it got even more popularized because it became, there's a Facebook page. Now there's a few. Yeah. And Private Investigations for the Missing, the organization that Bruce Maitland started, kind of popularized it a little bit too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Podcasting.
So what you're saying is when you got involved in 2006, Brianna Maitland's was just quote unquote just like every others out there, but now 20 years later, it's certainly, even though I classify just your regular person, it's one of the better known ones, but it was certainly not that way when you got involved in 2006.
No, not even close, not even remotely close. Okay. And and that took a lot of time. That took time, and it took persistence, I think, and it's kind of where it's looking back. It's a weird situation. It's kind of like the family being at odds with the police, but mending that problem took time. Because it's mended now. They get along well with the police, and they have a good working relationship. It's the same kind of concept. Yeah, it was a long road.
If I could ask very quickly, once again, if you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but when you contacted them in 2006, is your impression this is the first contact they had with like a private investigator who wouldn't be involved? Or had they entertained the idea before and dismissed it? Do you know anything about this? If you don't want to get into that, totally fine.
No.
But I just have to ask.
No, that's a good conversation. So they had guys come in, would call them up and say, I can solve this, they would say. And none of them ever did their job. They came in, would spend maybe a month, probably whenever they had time during the week or something, and then they would just walk away. And it was hurtful to the Maitlands. So when I got a hold of them, Kelly, her mother, told Bruce, I want to sit down and talk to him. And Bruce was so disenchanted with the whole thing. He's like, not another one, and I never left. He's actually said that to me a few times over the years, he never left. And I wouldn't do that. But we've had guys come to us over the years and say, they kind of like, I want to take a shot at it. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just a lot. It's a huge commitment. It's emotional. It's you got to leave home. You stay in hotel
Right.
rooms. There's a lot of work behind it, and thinking you're just going to come in and solve something that, all these really talented Vermont State Police investigators worked on for years, and that Lou Berry's worked on, that I've worked on. When I met Lou Berry, he had contacted the Maitlands, and I don't remember why. I'd have to ask him again, but he reached out to him and offered his services. And Bruce said, "What do you think? Will you go meet with him?" He had somebody working with him at the time, but they moved on to other endeavors pretty quickly. So I went and met him in Massachusetts at a restaurant, and went over everything with him, and called Bruce and said that, he seems good, great. And Lou and I ended up getting pretty close. But I went to him and I had binders. I mean, thick binders. Plopped them down in front of him. He's like, "Oh man." And I went through everything with him briefly, and he would call me every night. "Who is this? What is this? What is his? Did this get done? Did that get done?" And I couldn't believe. Now, of course, this was his job for 35 years, but he absorbed a ton of information. And you could tell that had I given it just to anybody off the street, they would be super overwhelmed. But he was familiar, so he did well with it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the
Okay.
PAs came and went,
Yeah.
and they would
Okay.
always they would work on it for a few hours and say, "This is who did it." They didn't know
Mhm.
what they were.
Okay. Very good. All right. So you were not the first one. You were the first one that, though, impressed them with your seriousness, your
Yeah,
professionalism, and you weren't going to, this wasn't some fly-by-night operation. You weren't going to guess, as you said, just, well, let's give it a shot. As
yeah,
this, as if
yeah,
you're working on like the Sunday crossword puzzle or something like that.
yeah. And I produced. I mean,
Mhm.
there was
Right.
I got stuff done.
Right.
And I came up with stuff, so they were happy.
Yeah. Okay. Realizing that you did not come into like over 2 years into the disappearance, of course, you're not a family member either. But we just want to go over the facts, like it's like we know now. Brianna's disappearance fairly well known, but just the general facts, just so we can cover kind of set things up. We don't have to get into the intricacies, but just about
Right.
that day into that night and when her car is finally found, and then we'll get into what the police did. But if you could just maybe quickly go over what are the actual facts of her being at work and, and
Yeah.
then eventually to the point where these, I guess, vacationers or travelers took pictures. Maybe we want to cover that area right in there, which seems to be the most important part. Can you do that very quickly?
Yeah. And I mean, you can go back to this too, but like for the listeners, if you want to know like about prior to that, like the family and why
Yeah.
they were there, living in Vermont, and all this other stuff, that's in the book in
Right.
detail. And I do like to tell people when they read the book, the chapter on the family, I think everything you need is there. And I think it's a good description of everything, but it's not super in depth. And it's not super in depth because, like Bruce said, he goes, I feel like people are peeking in my windows.
Right.
So you don't need to tell the readers every little thing about
Right.
us, but this is where we live, how we live. And I think it's fine, but I always tell people that if you think it's a little thin, that's why. But so the Brianna had started a couple of jobs, part-time jobs. She's 17 years old. She's not living at home at her parents' home. She's living at a friend's house. Now, she had been kind of skipping from friend's house to friend's house. And what had happened was Bruce and Kelly were having some marital problems. Brianna had just been given a car by her grandfather. She had this newfound freedom. She didn't want to be, they lived out in the middle of kind of nowhere. She was isolated. She wanted to be in town with her friends and running around and stuff. So now she had a car and she could do that. So they lived out in the middle of what I don't know about you, but I would consider the middle of nowhere.
Right.
They had a mile-long driveway into the woods. So and there's this great story too about when she was a kid, when you ask them about fond memories, they had a vehicle, like an old Jeep that was off the road. And she would drive it from the house down to the road to catch the bus to school. But she was a little girl. And she was driving that Jeep.
Neat.
I just think that's hysterical. about bouncing down the road
Yeah,
through the woods and stuff, you know?
that's kind of the area I grew up in, Pennsylvania. Not that I ever
Oh,
did that, but I
really?
can certainly relate to that. Yeah, out in the middle of nowhere, Leechburg, PA, kind of the same thing. So yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
sure,
So,
sure.
yeah, so, Bruce and Brianna were actually going to live in an apartment down in town, and but Bruce and Kelly ended up resolving things and staying together there. But Brianna ended up bouncing from house to house. So she was staying with a friend and the friend's father in Sheldon, and she was working at an inn, a historic inn, which it was a small, served food, had a little bar, had rooms, cool place called the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery. She also worked at a diner in St. Albans called KJ's Diner. It's still there. It's not called KJ's anymore. So on the night of her disappearance, well, the day of, she got up in the home, her friend's home, and her friend went to school. She had written a note saying, I got to work tonight. I'll be home between 10 and midnight. Because she was a dishwasher. She didn't really know when she'd get out. She finished kind of thing.
Okay.
She went and she got her GED results with her mom. Then they went out to lunch. They went shopping, bought a few things, clothing items and stuff. Mom took her back to this home. She changed, got ready for work. She drove to work. She worked at the inn, was a small building, and there's a little parking lot on the side of it. Montgomery's small.
Yeah.
And it's right as you start going into this town, kind of a turn. So her car literally sat right there in the parking lot where you could see it from inside. I mean, if you walked over to the window, you could see her car. Everyone in the building knew her,
Yeah.
Nobody noticed anything amiss. They were all said she was fine or whatever. When she left, they said she punched out at 11:20. They asked her to stay if she wanted to have something to eat, because they would do that for the employees and make them something to eat. She said, "Now I got to work really, really early at KJ's." So I think it was like 5:30 in the morning or something. So she left the inn and she leaves and heads out of town. It's right there on the bend that leaves town. And her car is found literally 2 minutes up the road. It's like a mile and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And in where it was found, she's heading out of town. She's heading in a westerly direction. On the opposing side of the road is an old farmhouse that sat all alone. It was boarded up. There was no barn there anymore or anything. It's just a house. But it was weather beaten, gray. All the windows are boarded up. And it sat all alone. Everything around it is a farm field. Off in the distance is the woods, and there's a creek back there and stuff. Mm-hmm. Somehow she had gone past it a little bit, backed up all the way till it hit the house. The house was pretty close to the road, but she went off. She hit this house in the side of the house hard enough that by a window where the plywood over the window fell onto the back of the car, down onto the trunk in the back of the car. Okay. So when you see photos, it looks like it's hung up on the foundation. Now we don't really know if it was or not because the car was towed away. But so that's, she leaves at 11:20 at night. Around midnight, witnesses start to see the vehicle. So there's 4 witnesses that we know of. A boyfriend, a girlfriend, a man, and a former boyfriend of Brianna's, who was also someone she kind of grew up with. She knew him as a kid. She dated him on and off. There's something you have to know about that too. But anyway, they claim that the headlights are on. One says that a blinker was on. Both their doors are open. So the ex-boyfriend actually stops. His name is James. This isn't anything that's not public.
It's public. Yep. We don't have to get into last names, but certainly his first name is public. Certainly. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
sure.
Sure. Everybody knows his first name.
Sure.
So James, the odd thing about James is he tells a bunch of different stories. I think it totally told 4 different stories. When we ended up talking to him, Lou ended up interviewing him. At first, he said he was there at 2:30 in the morning. He told the police, and he was coming home from Canada. He had said he'd been partying in Canada. Of course, they're not that far from Canada. And he came down. He saw the vehicle. He put his lights on it. He said she wasn't there. There's nothing he could do. So he just left. He said, and people would say, well, and we asked him this, why didn't you call the police? He's like, she wasn't there. And I'm not going to call the police on myself. I've been drinking. I mean, I knew she wasn't there. So a lot of what he said kind of made sense, but then he kept changing the story. So then he said, his final story, and he swears it's the truth, it was that he left a friend's house. 4:30 in the morning, he sees a car. He pulls over. He goes up to the vehicle, looks in it and everything, shuts the lights off, shuts the doors, realizes she's not there, and he leaves. He goes home. Again, he says, she's not there. I'm not going to call the police on myself. So at 8 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning, 3 young people are driving by. They're heading into town, and they see the vehicle. They pull over. They think it's so odd that they pull over, and they take pictures of it, and they go up and they look in the car. They see things on the ground, and they make notes of things on the ground, stuff like that. It's not until 1 in the afternoon that someone calls the troopers, and the troopers come. A trooper comes and he looks at the vehicle. He picks some things up off the ground. He throws them in the car. He shuts the door, and he calls the police, or he calls a tow truck, and they tow it. He sees her uncashed paychecks on the front seat. They're not for much. She was a dishwasher. He'd only worked 3 nights, and they were like a week apart. So he went to the inn, and it was closed. And he ended up getting called away, and he went on a long weekend, and he never followed up, and he never alerted anyone. And it just went to a garage right there in Montgomery and sat. So time goes on. Her friend Jillian that she lives with, that's also public, so it's not okay.
Yep.
The friend she was staying with, Jillian, had gone to St. Albans for the weekend to stay with a sister. She came home on Monday, and she sees the note that she had seen before she left. It said, I'll be home. I'm working tonight. I'll be home between 10 and 12 or whatever. And it's untouched. She realizes it hasn't been touched. She wonders what's going on. Tuesday, she calls the Maitlands, and she says, Tuesday would have been the 23rd. She calls the Maitlands, and she says, did Brianna come back home or something? They're like, no, why? And she said, well, she hasn't been here. I can tell she hasn't been here and stuff. So they start kind of scurrying around and calling people and stopping at people's houses and trying to inquire about her and stuff. By the 24th, they contact the police, and they say, something is going on. So they put out an APB on her car. Again, they're the police, but they don't know where her car is, but they had her car towed.
Right.
Thursday rolls around, the 25th. They go to the trooper barracks. I believe it's in St. Albans. It's in the book. And they go to the front desk, and they start explaining what's going on. And one of the cops there, one of the troopers there, says, hang on a second. And he goes in his effects, and he pulls out a picture of Brianna's car backed into the house.
Wow.
And Kelly said she thought she was going to get sick. She was going to be sick. But they're like, where the hell is that was the cop that was there. So where the hell is the car? So they find out where the car is. It was Lutz Automotive in Montgomery. Bruce calls his son, meet me there. They go there. Give me the keys. I'm going to open the trunk. They don't have the keys. No one ever found the keys.
Okay.
So they take a crowbar and they pop the trunk open to see if she's in the trunk.
Right.
She's not.
Right.
And then it starts panic. There's absolute panic. And they realize this huge gap of time, 25th, they've lost a lot of important time.
Right. Right. So they didn't make a connection. They just took this car, and it's the perception, I guess, is that they really didn't do anything about it. They just towed the car, but for some reason they never, it was, I guess, in Brianna's mother's name, they never contacted her to say, hey, why was your
Right.
car backed up against this house? And they never did that.
Yeah. They attribute it to drunk driver,
Huh.
which I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and Lou Barry and I talk about it because he was a cop for years, and he said cops find a car like that, they assume it's a drunk driver. We see that stuff all the time, and I get that. The cops see weird stuff. When I was bounty hunting, I saw weird shit, man. When you invade people's lives, you see weird things, really weird things. But I'm sure cops, it was 1,000 times what I ever saw. But my thing is, I just think that's bizarre. First of all, her car wasn't in a situation, especially if you're physically standing in the spot, you would realize it. From the pictures, you can kind of get it, but it's not like she was driving down the road and a deer ran out in front of her and she went in a ditch.
Nope.
Not even close.
That's not, and could not have happened. That's true.
No, it's just bizarre. She would have to stop and then crank it in reverse, and it would just seem like anyone would know this is weird. And why here? There's nothing else here. Of all the things, all the nothingness here. She hit this house.
Yeah,
it's on. You know what I mean? And so I would have questioned it, but if he had reached out to Kelly, they would have been on it immediately.
Right.
And it would have been treated as a crime scene, I think, but it was not. So that's really unfortunate.
Right. I guess something I also want to ask you, being that it seems like this car, her car was there, let's just say midnight until these people who took these pictures, of course, one of the pictures is the cover of your book, which, like I said, we're eventually going to talk to about your motivation for writing it and everything. But in that time, let's just say 8 hours, did no police officer, anybody drive by there and see the car and get curious, or no local cops, no Vermont Highway Patrol that would have gone by there or anything? What do you know about that?
Not that we know of. I mean, he was called and showed up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but there had to be a ton of people that saw it there. And to this day on Facebook and different discussions, you'll see people pipe in and say, I saw the car that morning. I drove by and saw it there. And they assumed somebody drinking and driving, somebody just discarded the car or something. I don't think it was anybody that knew her specifically, but there had to be a lot of people because, again, to me, when I'm up there, I'm like, this is the middle of nowhere, but it's not. When you stand there, I've stood there and cars are going by, it's the only way into town that way.
Yeah.
So that's a really hard thing, I think, for people to understand is like, if you're not from that kind of an area, being in some place that's that sparsely populated really seems odd. I mean, I know now, obviously, but the first time I went up there, I remember thinking, where the hell do all these people work? There's nothing around, you know what I mean? There's nothing around. Vermont's one of those places too, when you look at it on a map, there's like this vast area and part of the state where you look at it on the map and you go, wow, there's like nothing. And then when you're driving on these roads, all of a sudden there's a house. And then you go miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. And then all of a sudden there's a house. And you're like, wow.
What do these people do?
God forbid they got to call a cop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or go to the hospital or something. Yeah.
Yep. It's bizarro.
Yeah.
But I mean that, but people live that way and they love it, I guess. But but it's different for sure. So anyway, there's got to be a ton of witnesses in the morning that saw that car. And we still have people saying, oh yeah, I drove past it and stuff like that.
But, all right. So seemingly no law enforcement, whether local law enforcement or Vermont State Police, drove by that in those 8 hours. I don't know if that's unusual or not. Maybe it's because it's like out in the middle of nowhere. Maybe it's not that unusual. If it was a city street, of course, then that would be something different.
Yeah. Well, so it's like 13 hours because it's like 11:20 to like, I don't know, 1 or 1:30.
Yeah.
But
right.
So that's the other thing. There's really no police presence up there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think St. Albans, which is close by, has police, but once you get out of town limits, I don't get state police, and they're really thin. I can remember going into the southern part of the state and driving all the way up to the Canadian border and seeing one cop on the highways. That's it.
That's it.
So there's just not a lot of traffic. You're on those highways, you can really move on them. They're a nice, beautiful country highway, and there's just not a lot of traffic, but the
All right.
roadways are all really nice and stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
different way of living.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So let's move on to the police investigation. Of course, understanding you were not involved at this time. So your general, of course, you've gotten to talk to the police officers involved, and and how much paperwork they've given you or not given you, maybe is a subject to talk about, or we just don't know how much they've given you and not given you, or her family. But looking at the investigation, what was done once it was figured out Brianna's missing, the car's up against this house, etc. The searches. What can you say about the searches that were done and who they interviewed, as best as you can tell?
So it's a weird thing when of course, they don't want to share, which is understand. You understand. It's a one-way street kind of thing.
Yeah.
But over the years, I mean, and even in the beginning there, the guy who was leading up the investigation, who was overseeing it, he sat down and talked to me a couple of times. And he would tell me certain little things and stuff. But it's an odd thing. It's an odd situation to be in where you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what they know. So
Right.
you have to always consider there's information. Can I make an informed decision opinion when there's information I just don't have?
Yeah.
But they did tell me things over the years and things they felt I should know. And if I asked them questions, if they could answer it, they would answer it. In the beginning, of course, class kids did a really good search, but they did searches over the years, and they searched hard, and they would use them oftentimes as training exercises. So which is great because they can mesh the two things together. And
Yeah.
they don't want to go home thinking they missed something, so they work hard. It's a thing we hear often, is that you'll see on Facebook and stuff is, cops don't care if they solve this. They don't even want to solve it or whatever. That's just not true. There's no truth to that whatsoever. And again, it's a you don't know what you don't know kind of thing. They've done searches that were never even released publicly, that people don't even know about. I mean, hard, long, tedious searches, going up in that terrain. You got to remember, Vermont's 76% forested. I mean, it's just wilderness, and it's rough terrain, and they'll go out and they'll do it. And so yeah, I mean, over the years, whenever it came up and they needed to do a search, they would. I forget. I'm forgetting kind of your question here.
That's all right. Well, that's why I'm here. So they did some searches. Obviously, nothing was found, but even in the process of doing these searches, they find anything that could be connected to Brianna at all. Anything. A shoe.
Well, so
we've talked about like maybe a credit card or something like that have popped up in other disappearances that we've featured on the podcast. Anything like that, or maybe they did and that you just don't know. What do you think? Your best guess.
Well, we know that there was instances where they found things that were like, one time somebody called and they found a body, so that they went out and they searched, and that was really hard on the family. It was early on, and it was a pig carcass, things like that. Then they found, but there was some stuff that they found that was pretty interesting. They found a pair of jeans. A man found them on his property, so they went out there. They took possession of them. It was about 7 miles south where she went missing.
Okay.
They've tested them, but DNA testing keeps getting better and better and better and better.
It does.
So they'll test them again. You know what I mean? I feel they will. So nothing that's helped. There was biological evidence found at the scene, kind of close to the scene, that they tested fairly recently. Can't remember how long ago. It was a year and a half ago. That wasn't related. Turned out to be not related. They know it wasn't related because they did genomic sequencing. Othram Labs in Texas did it, and they found who the biological evidence belonged to, and so they know for a fact it had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
I can't go into why, but
okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Let me move into this. Maybe about interviews. Of course, you've already mentioned James. Of course, he's like the ex-boyfriend, and he just, I don't know, quote unquote, maybe coincidentally sees the car. I don't know what the odds are of that. I don't live there. I've never been there, so we have to consider that. But was he questioned? We also might talk about this girl Keely or Kaylee who had a
Yeah.
fight with Brianna not
Right.
long before she went missing. Were these people questioned? Do you know the results of those
Yeah.
interviews, and maybe even the coworkers, people who were working with her that night? Were these people questioned, and your insight into any of that or all of that?
So James, of course, people really questioned him about whether he was involved because he lied and he did some hanky things. And of course,
Yeah,
like you said, how odd that he finds the car.
yeah.
But the car was on his way home from where he was at, and he was
Okay.
where he was going. So that wasn't so unusual. Like we were saying, like it's. I always want to use the word remote, which isn't true. It's just very rural.
Yeah.
There's only so many ways you can go to get to certain destinations. And so I think that was an honest thing that he stumbled upon the car.
Okay.
He was interviewed really well
Okay.
a few times in a few different situations. Again, he was kind of odd in the way he lied, but that didn't seem to be out of character for him, from what we understand.
Okay.
And but they went on hard. There was nothing to ever remotely say he was involved in anything like that. He ended up passing away. He was in a car accident. I couldn't tell you. It's in the dates in the book. I can't remember when it was. But so Brianna knew him really well. She dated him on and off over the years, kids, and she knew his sister. They were all friends. And when she was going kind of house to house and living at different people's houses and stuff, she actually stayed at their grandparents' house for a little bit. I don't know how long exactly, but she was welcome there,
Okay.
so they all knew each other. So the night that going on to Keely Lacrosse, another name that everyone knows publicly. So Keely and Brianna got in a fight, and this is number 2. I think it's 22 days prior or 24 days prior to her disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
So what had happened was Keely had gone out of town to visit family in Massachusetts, and Brianna spent time with her boyfriend for a few days. So when her friends went and picked up Keely, they told her what was going on. She comes back. Of course, she's spitting nails, wants to beat the hell out of Brianna.
Hmm.
So there's this issue going on. James and Brianna are together one night, and they go to a party. It's at a pallet factory, and all the kids are partying there or whatever. And Keely's harassing Brianna the whole night, trying to pick a fight with her. Brianna's trying to avoid it. She's trying to talk to her about it. Keely's not having any of that. She just wants a piece of her.
Yeah.
Eventually, Brianna leaves and goes out and sits in the truck. Doesn't want to, James comes out and he says, "We'll go shortly." He walks back in the party. Keely comes out with another girl, bangs on the window. She puts the window down, tries to talk to her, and Keely reaches in and punches her twice in the face, pretty badly.
Yep.
Uh,
You have the
she
picture.
bleeds.
You have the picture in your book. I mean,
Yeah,
black
she
eyes,
got,
etc. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
people say about that. They say she had to have punched her more than twice. Nah. If you've ever been punched in the schnoz before, your eyes will go black, your nose will swell up, your eyes will swell up. It doesn't take much. She popped her good twice in the face.
Wow.
So she's bleeding. Keely goes back in the party. She realizes she thinks she's got to get help. She's bleeding pretty bad. She goes and knocks on doors, and a car pulls up, and it's James's sister, and they give her a ride. I think she goes to James's grandparents' house. Anyway, in the morning, Bruce picks her up, takes her to the hospital. Her friend takes the pictures of her face. So for years, even today, people will say Keely must have done it. She had to have done it. This is what this is about, and all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You got to kind of keep in mind, I think a lot of people that are familiar with Brianna's case, I think that they forget that she was a 17-year-old kid and her friends were 16 and 17. These aren't exactly mobsters putting hits on people, and
Right.
kids kill kids. It happens, but it's pretty remote. But when you interview Keely, and she's talked to us, and she's done interviews, She doesn't shy away from anything. There's nothing's off limits. You can ask her anything, and she's real honest about it. She said, "Look, she was with my boyfriend. I'd punch her again under the same circumstances. That's just it was. It doesn't have anything to do with anything else. This is kind of the situation." So she's really honest about it. She also was in trouble pretty badly on 2 different occasions. One of them, she was involved in a home invasion. One of them, had a child in her car when she was drinking and driving. But the police came in, and I think she was on some kind of release when one of them happened. She was on probation or something. Anyway, the police would tell her it would benefit you greatly. You're looking at some really serious stuff. It benefit you greatly to talk to us about Brianna. And she's like, I don't know anything. If I knew anything, I would have told you years ago. I don't know anything. So they're in the dark, just like the rest of us. The kids are.
I have to ask, being that this was an assault, was there any chance that Brianna or her parents were going to file charges against Keely? Was that something that was impending that was going to happen, but Brianna went missing first, or what?
Yeah, so that's what fed into that whole theory. Yeah. So there was charges against Keely. There was a court date, and of course the court date got dropped when she went missing. When the reality of her being missing set in, they dropped the court date. Well, that's how that functions. I mean, if Brianna can't be there, it's not going to go forward.
Right.
So, automatically everybody assumes that they killed her so she wouldn't, so you got to take that leap of this girl is going to go to court and get in trouble for punching somebody in the face. So she kills her instead. Yeah.
It seems like a stretch. I agree with you, but
we're pretty confident, when you talk.
Right. We just something we have to talk about, because once again, it's been out there. Everybody knows about this fight. And of course we have to talk about it. You're the one is investigated. You're the one that's talking to Keely and everything. And you've experienced this firsthand, so that's why we're talking. I'm talking to you. Sure.
Yeah. That definitely fed into that whole theory. Sure. That's what made people believe that she did something to her so she wouldn't have to go to court for that,
Okay.
Yeah.
What about these employees? Did the police originally talk to them at this Lantern restaurant? Anything that they remember that maybe stuck out? Anybody for it's just an example. Somebody coming in asking for Brianna or something like that while she was working there. Anything like that popped up?
That was another thing that kind of started a problem with the family and the police, where I think it was 9 days after Brianna went missing, Bruce went in there and got the phone records from the end, and the inn owners were fine. They were like, yeah, absolutely, we'll give you the phone records. But the police hadn't even been in there yet to ask any questions 9 days later. So that pissed him right off. Since then, the police have interviewed everyone that was there.
Okay.
I should say I don't think they did as good of a job as they could have.
Okay.
But we worked on that. So.
Okay, and maybe we'll come back.
And that was another thing.
Please.
That was another thing too.
Please.
The people that were there were kind of good about that we did talk to. Were like, there was nothing odd that we saw. It was normal. Everything was normal. And then when we thought someone there might have done something to her, it really makes no sense. I mean, they would be attracting the police to them. I mean, of course, if you're going to kill somebody, you're thinking or abduct somebody, you're thinking, of course, the police are going to come here and ask, where she worked.
Yeah.
And but we did think that it could have been someone that was in there when she was working a different night. That was definitely a possibility that entered our mind, but there's no records of who stayed there by the time we got to that. That was long gone.
Yeah. Okay.
And she'd only worked 3 nights total. So
she only worked 3 nights total at this place before she went missing. That was it. Okay.
Yeah. A lot of her friends didn't even know she was working there.
Huh.
Yeah. Because of the fight that happened with Keely.
Yeah.
There was this really big cooling off thing going on where her friends were mad at her. And those friends, a lot of them regret it now, because they're like, now we can't even make up. They all said, that whole thing would have blown. it would eventually would have just blown over. But of
Mhm.
course, at the time, we're pissed at her because it was a betrayal kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, but they were all shying away from her. She was shying away from them. The friend she was living with said she would come home after work and read. She wasn't going out, because the cops have accused her, said in the paper that she was involved in the drug community and stuff. And her friend said she was coming home and reading after work. She wasn't doing drugs and running around. So, yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Let's go back to the car a little bit. Of course, we talked about how you've explained this wasn't a situation where she like swerved to miss a deer and hit this house. And by the way, we should state if you go on Google's Street View, the house isn't there anymore. It got burned down. You
Yeah.
actually have to go to older Street Views to actually see it. If anybody is
Right.
interested in doing that, if you get a little confused about all this, you're not going to see
Yeah.
it in like the newest Google satellite view or anything. You're just going to have to find like go to some other, older pictures to find that. But going back to the car, you stated that the keys are missing, but I understand that, for example, this necklace was ripped. It was found that, of course, there was like change on the ground. I think we even talked about in previous conversations. Somebody took the time to count all of it or something bizarre like that. But
Yeah.
there were some signs, other than the car being backed into the house, there were other signs of what we might call violence there. Can you talk about at least a little bit of that?
Yeah. So when you see the pictures, in the book, there's a little bit of debris. There's like water bottles and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And the people, they call themselves the world travelers. Those three young people that saw the car in the morning. When they walked up to the car, they stated there was change on the ground, a to-go cup, like a coffee cup, a broken necklace. I can't remember what else. They make note of some certain things there, but they were very specific. There was like 65 cents of change on the ground or something. It was just really odd. What happens, I think, is when people do interviews and stuff over the years, it gets kind of discombobulated.
Sure it does.
And
Sure.
it gets tangled even in your own mind if you're a
Yeah.
witness.
Sure.
But one of the things was that there was a broken necklace there by the driver's side, and that the cop picked it up and threw it on the seat. Now, we're not so sure that's true anymore. There's a lot of stuff like that you start to really wonder if is that a fact. So we'll go back and we'll talk to, Lou often corresponds with the investigators on the case, and he'll ask them, is this specifically true or not? But this wasn't a place where people would stop. We'd ask the kids that, did kids go there to party and stuff in this old house? And they're like, no. It was weird. It was right next to the road, and there's nothing around it. If the cops showed up, what would we do? There'd be nowhere to go.
Right.
They go, you couldn't get in the house anyways. They couldn't get in the house. It was boarded up. And even if you could get in the house, we wouldn't want to be in the house. It's an old fallen down house,
Right.
So nobody went there. So yeah, the debris that was there and stuff, other than the fact that it's on the roadside, it looks like it's around the vehicle. So that's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, they tow the car away. They don't treat it as a crime scene. So that it really, you don't know what condition the car seat's in. You don't know, little anomalies about the area or whatever, what gear it was in. Was it physically hung up on the foundation to the point where you couldn't drive it away? We don't know, because you can see that it's kind of propped up.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely at least tell that there's not all of the weight is on the back tires. You can tell that. It doesn't look like it's just parked there. You can tell that the back end's propped up. Now, very well may be, being that it's a rear-wheel drive car, that it had enough traction to pull away from there. But certainly, some of the weight of the car is being supported by the house. Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly.
So that screws it up that that it was just towed away.
Mm-hmm. That does screw things up. It certainly does.
Yeah, you can't get a definite answer on a lot of that stuff.
Let me ask you some questions once again. If if it's in the police reports regarding any signs of like other tire tracks, any footprints, shoe prints, what was the ground like in that general area? any, for example, drag marks. We talked about this when we covered the disappearance of Jody Huisentruit. She certainly got dragged away, even though it was a parking lot. You could see drag marks of her being drug away. Anything like that that has popped up in talking to investigators, anything in the paperwork, anything like that.
So Bruce actually said that you could see tracks that went down in the grass. So that night, that day, it was a low of 18 and a high of 33.
Wow, cold.
But there was like frost. It was high grass and it was frost. In one of the pictures, you can actually see tracks. So he had said, no, he's there, what, 5 days later?
Yeah.
And he can see some tracks. That's about the best we got.
Okay.
Other than that, there's nothing.
Wow.
Anything like that.
Wow.
And you wouldn't like necessarily, it was searched, but you could look out into this field.
It's pretty flat.
Yeah, it's flat.
Yeah.
So they did go out and search, of course, that field. They searched that area extremely well. But yeah.
All right. And we also should note, as far as the car goes, no damage to it. For example, no paint from like another car as if two cars touched. Nothing like that. No bumper really messed up except for the rear bumper that hit the house. Nothing like that. But was the car drivable? When they did get it back, did somebody continue to drive it or did they park it? What was the status of the car? How badly was it messed up?
It didn't have, it was an old car. It was a beater, so it had damage, but it wasn't anything that was new. Nothing of substantial. No paint like that, transfer or anything like that. It was drivable. And eventually, after the police had it there, they went up to the Maitlands, and eventually they junked it. Bruce said after a while, it just became an oddity where people would just come to stare at the car and look at the car.
Right.
And they're all looking at the same thing, and there was nothing to decipher. Now today they would never release the car back to the family. That was kind of an odd thing to do. But they did process it. And they had prints out of it and biological evidence out of it. That stuff all ended up coming back to known people. Ex-boyfriends, friends, stuff like that.
Which would not be a surprise given that it was her car and probably those people rode in it at one time or another.
Right. Yep.
Okay. One thing, once again, I'm not, of course, an expert on Brianna's disappearance, but one of the things that really caught me by surprise in reading your book was there was a lime, so a fruit, it's a fruit that usually, of course, I guess I'm not a drinker, but it's usually used like with tequila or something or Coronas or something. A lime was found on the trunk of the car, like a slice of lime, or what are we talking about here?
So that's another one of those weird things that, we're not even sure definitively how this worked because there's no photos of it or anything like that.
You see.
So that's always been a thing that I just think it's an anomaly that means nothing. I don't know if it could have gotten on there over at the restaurant or how it could have gotten on there. If they're drinking Coronas out of the trunk of the car or something gets on there somehow. I don't really know. But it was that was something that was that the kids in the morning, the three young guys or kids in the morning saw. It was two guys and a girl. They saw it and they made note of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an odd one. Okay, and we have to remember it's on the trunk of the car, even though the back of the car hit the house. So somehow the lime was able to stay on the car despite this at least small collision that the car had with the house.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
18 degrees. I don't know if it was frozen to it.
Okay, could have been frozen. Right. Very good. Okay.
And I don't really know where on the trunk it was either.
Yeah. Okay. So just something for everybody to think about. That is something that I had never heard before. Yeah. Maybe a lot of other people have not heard of it. Once again, it's in your book, and we're going to talk about your book before we're done here. Your opinion, just if you can say, if you don't want to touch it, totally fine. Do you think the police, what do you think the police's opinion is on the disappearance of Brianna Maitland? Because we're going to get more into your side of it and the work that you've done. Do you think that they have an opinion on a theory as to what happened to Brianna Maitland? if you want to answer, you can answer. If you don't, we can certainly move on.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for them.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Very
don't
good.
know.
Very good. Let's move on now to maybe your side of it. You've been involved now for about 18 years, not quite 18 years, summer of 2006. And over that time, have you or these other people who've been helping you, the family outside of the police, have you organized your own searches trying to search for her? Whether it was like recently or back in 2015, just pick a year. And how far have these searches gone? How many miles in each direction? And can you talk a little bit more about that? Your understanding of the searches with originally and then since then.
Have we personally
Yes. Yeah.
searched?
Yeah. Right. Right.
I don't know. We haven't done boots on the ground searches. I haven't personally.
Okay.
Police have done many.
Yeah.
We're more apt to go and interview people wherever we need to go.
Right.
I was going to go to Florida at one point, and the police ended
Hmm.
up taking that interview over. So I mean, we get around, but
Yeah.
it's been pretty localized.
Okay.
But there's been stuff that's stretched states and states away.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on to this now. Regarding going back to James and Keely, just to kind of go over this a little bit more, you actually had a chance. Did you personally have a chance to interview James one-on-one? You actually spoke to him like face to face.
Lou did. Lou did
Lou
at
did,
length.
your other assistant.
On
Okay.
more than one occasion, yeah.
More than one occasion. Of course, we already know now that James has some different stories, but
Yeah,
maybe they kind of make sense. Maybe we should just clarify something about him seeing the car because it's kind of like a T intersection there where the house was. He was
right.
actually coming down like the T. He wasn't like on the main road that went by the house. My understanding, the way you explained it to me, and this is something that I didn't understand until you said it, he was actually coming down the T, so his headlights kind of would have almost been right on the house coming down this road. Am I right about that? Is that correct?
I know at least in one of his stories, that's what he had said. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. But either way, he said he positioned his vehicle so that he'd put his lights on it,
Mm-hmm.
and he was looking at it and he's thinking, "What the hell is her car doing there like that?" And then he
Yeah.
got out with his lights on it. He went over to it and looked through it and everything.
Okay.
But I don't remember if it was. I can't remember if it was from the T or not.
Okay. All right.
I can't.
Because, once again, I don't know if anybody's ever tested this over the last 20 years, but my perception, even though I don't think I've ever even been in the state of Vermont, but at night, if somebody was driving by there, would he have been able to tell at night, especially with the headlights on and everything, that it was actually Brianna's car, being that it's dark and everything else? It
I
seems
think so.
unlikely unless his headlights were actually on the car. Of course, she had a unique car, so maybe that's not a surprise, but
Yeah.
that's I'm just
So,
wondering if anybody tried to like test that over the years to just see if what's
well, I
going on.
think he would actually because
Okay.
the pictures are a little deceiving to look at. The
Okay.
car would have been pretty close to the road. The house didn't sit very far off the road at
No,
all.
very close, very
And
close.
when you're coming around this bend, it's really gradual. I think he would have had a really good view of it actually.
Okay.
And her car was very distinct, and everyone knew
Yes.
that it was. Yeah, I don't think he would have had any problem seeing it.
Okay, very good. And of course, we talked about Keely. I should ask you this, being that you did get to speak to Keely. Or maybe James too, did James or Keely, being that they both knew Brianna fairly well, of course, with Keely, they had a falling out. Did
Yeah,
either of them offer up their own opinion as to what happened to Brianna, being that they would have known her as well as anybody? Did they ever
I
offer
think
up
they
an
were both.
opinion in your interviews?
Yeah, they're dumbfounded. They're dumbfounded. They don't know. And Keely, yeah, they had a problem and everything, but they were friends, and they
Yeah.
had been friends for a long time. So it wasn't they would have blown over. But no, they're dumbfounded. They
Okay.
don't know.
So
Yeah.
they never offered up a theory she ran off to
Like
LA or somebody or anything like that. Once again, being that they knew her the best, they just really just had nothing to
it's
say.
funny that you would they everybody would kind of regurgitate rumors,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how you would know that they didn't know anything because they would kind of say, well, I kind of believe this. What they're doing is they're hearing different stories and they're going, well, this is the one that sounds most likely to me. But we know that it's not true. We know that it's just a rumor and there's no truth to it whatsoever. So they're like, oh, well, maybe it was this then. And no, that's not true either. No, that's not true. So they don't know. The really weird thing, and we tell people this a lot, is that after 20 years, not one piece of information that any of the locals have brought to us have ever bore any fruit whatsoever. None.
It's crazy how that works.
Yeah, not one bit.
Yeah.
We don't think they know anything. And the funny thing is that people will say, I know what happened. I mean, really confident. You go, okay, what happened? And they'll tell you a story and you go, okay, that's not true though. And how, well, what do you mean it's not true? And then you tell them exactly why it's not true. But they're really confident. And it's weird that people will be so confident in something that they just heard.
Yeah.
You know, somebody just told them, they didn't see it firsthand, or they didn't have anything to prove it. It's just that someone told them, and maybe they trust that person. So they like, well, this is true. No, it's not.
Right.
You know?
This reminds me of what you're talking about. Maybe you've seen the movie. I know many of the listeners have seen this movie. If you've seen the movie Zodiac, of course, which is about trying to figure out who the Zodiac killer was. And there's a montage in the middle of the movie where they're interviewing these different people who say they have information, and they're just pulling all sorts of things that, facts about the Zodiac killer that aren't even true. Well, I cut off his hands and everything else. Well, that, the Zodiac killer didn't do that. When we had our prior conversation, when you mentioned that, I was thinking, man, that reminds me of that scene in the movie. But that captured, I think I run into that a lot in the disappearances that I cover too. So it really rings true to me. And so you talking about it absolutely rings true to me as well. Absolutely.
I have a really, really newfound respect for the police after all these years of working on this. Yeah. It must drive them crazy. It's just the garbage information that comes to them. And a lot of it, the people they're giving the information they want to help. They honestly are trying to do a good thing. But God, it's got to drive the police crazy to just go around. It sort of drives us crazy. We've had people actually say to us, it's a weird thing. They'd say, I know what happened. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Okay, I'm all ears. And they'll tell you more than one story. Literally, you had one girl tell us 3 stories right in a row. And I'm just listening. She got done and I go, okay, but they can't all be true. She's like, what do you mean? Baffled. They can't all be true. You just told me 3 different stories. Which one's true? Just kind of looking at me like I'm an idiot. We walk away and I said to Lou, I'm like, are we going to talk about this? Is this weird? Because this is weird, right? It is weird. I don't know what that is.
I don't either. I don't know.
It's lack of critical thinking skills or what it is. But
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And there's so many rumors. I was hoping, and I think I did a pretty good job of it in the book, of dispelling these big rumors.
Yep. Toward the end, you went through some different theories and things, kind of trying to do that, doing that. Yeah.
Because the people, I've had a lot of people contact me on Facebook from up there and say, thank you. This community really needed this book, and I didn't know these things weren't true. I always thought there's some truth to them, and so that helped. That made me feel good. That helped them.
Okay. I want to give you an opportunity. This probably is, other than the car being backed, I think, into the building. This is one of the other points about her disappearance that I think is the well known. This whole thing about her and her mother being in a grocery store and her quote unquote freaking out, or whatever words have been used over the years. You actually write about this in the book. We've talked about it. You have a particular insight. In fact, her own parents have a particular insight into this. And maybe it's not as suspicious as it's been made to be. Do you want to kind of address that?
Yeah, and I can't remember if it was a grocery store, if it was a clothing store. It might have been a clothing store. Okay. Because that was the day. That was the day of her disappearance, and I think they were shopping for her clothing, work clothes. But anyway, Kelly, her mother, said that on the show Disappeared, that Brianna noticed something and walked outside of the store, and when she came back in, she was real kind of nervous or something. And that just took hold, and everybody went crazy with that. And what happened, and blah 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 blah. And I ended up talking to interviewing a guy who said, I know who that was that she talked to, and he told her not to go to work that night. Now I said this on a podcast, and I said, I interviewed this person, and this is what he told me. It doesn't mean I believe it, but this is what he said. You know, he could have said Bigfoot got it. It doesn't mean it happened.
That's right.
It just took root, and everybody's like, this is what Greg said. That, this is what happened. Somebody told her not to go to work. And well, yeah, but we don't think there was any truth to that whatsoever. And I think Kelly may have misinterpreted. I think she might have been spitballing a little bit, and it just got taken as fact or whatever. We think she just went out to have a cigarette and didn't want to get caught by her mother.
Okay.
Okay. There's nothing to prove there's any truth to it whatsoever. And the guy that gave me that information turned out to be not trustworthy whatsoever. He gave us a lot of other information that was false. He gave us a lot of other information that was, you couldn't prove it or disprove it either way, but it was just preposterous information, so.
Okay. All right. So I want to make sure I give you an opportunity to talk about that. Something that maybe has seemed like something to a lot of people, but your opinion, of course, working on this for 18 years, is it just is not much of anything, as far as you can tell.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think her mother might have misinterpreted something.
Okay, and it's very possible. And of course, going back to the cigarette, if she's 17, if her parents don't want her smoking, maybe kids generate some lies so they can kind of go do these things and cover these things up. Not unusual. Not unusual.
Yeah.
In all of your work over the last 18 years, I just have to ask you this once again. This is right in the outline. From the interviews, any talk about Brianna regarding depression, anybody stalking her, mental health issues, suicide talk, meeting anybody? Has any of this ever popped up in any of the people you talk to, whether parents, friends, anybody else? Any of those topics ever come up to the point that you think it's something substantial?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Okay.
Nothing like that.
Never talked if we're going just specifically stalking. She thought some guy was stalking her. John Smith was stalking her. Nothing like that.
No.
Wow. Looking back at it, of course, hindsight 2020. You look back at it now. You are now an expert on Brianna's disappearance, working on this for 18 years. But looking back at 2004, when she went missing, the things that were done, a lot of mistakes made, things that you think, of course, we're all human. We know mistakes are going to be made because we're human. But things that were really oversights that maybe could have solved the disappearance at the time, or maybe shortly thereafter, or not. The way you look at it now.
Yeah, well, I think the police have acknowledged that they did things wrong initially, and to me that's huge that they would come out and say yes.
Okay.
We did some things wrong, and they corrected that. But just the fact that they just kind of blew that off. I mean, they even told Bruce and Kelly at one point, she probably went to Boston. She'll be back. Kids do that. Bruce was like, "What the hell are you talking about? Her car is crashed.
Yeah.
There's paychecks on the sea. Her migraine medicine is in there. What are you talking about? She didn't show up for work, And they're like, yeah." So that was an issue. And that's why there was a big problem there in the beginning. There was an incident where Bruce went to Jillian's house after she went missing and said, "I want her stuff. Where's her stuff?" He wanted to see what was there, if there's notes or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And Jillian gave Bruce the diary, Bruce and Kelly, and her diary. So he ended up turning the diary over to the police, and there were some pages ripped out, and they went after Bruce. They thought that he had torn stuff out of there to hide something. And it was a huge fight over that. Come to find out, Jillian tore the stuff out because she was trying to save Brianna a little embarrassment.
Wow.
Which she's a kid. She just didn't want her to get in trouble for something, or be embarrassed about something. So, yeah, that was an issue. But
Okay. I guess what I'm asking you is that I don't want to use the word fate, but was it just kind of a thing that the way this all went down in 2004, no matter what people may particularly believe about a particular theory, that 20 years later that it was still going to be unsolved no matter what anybody did at the time? Or do you have a different insight into this, that different things had been done at the time, the disappearance would have been solved by now? Once again,
I
as
don't
best as you
know.
can.
That's so hard to say. I don't know if that's something you can really predict. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But we all know from television and whatever where
Mhm.
it's important to be right on top of this. If this is what's happening, the first
Yeah.
48 hours is really crucial. Um, yeah, just the protocol there of just towing the car away and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That came up, and again, that comes up in like Maura Murray's case where she's just a drunk driver. She'll show up tomorrow, and that's what they say. They say, the next morning they always show up and want their car back.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really bad protocol because what if
They don't
it's an
show up?
abduction or something, or she hit her head on the windshield and she's off in the woods dying or something? So protocol has got to be, we're on it. That's got to be, and they did change that. So there was a disappearance after Brianna's, and I can't remember his name. I can't remember the kid's name, but they hopped on it. Actually, there was one of Hank Alberelli's articles. They talked about a disappearance of a girl too afterwards, and they put a bunch of officers on it full time immediately and went after it. And they realized because of Brianna's case that this is what needed to be done. Yeah, so protocol there changed for that in that instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm asking, we had a disappearance. It was the oldest disappearance. Still to this day, it's the oldest disappearance we've ever featured on Unfound. And miraculously, it got solved here in February, a disappearance from 1945 of a woman who we now found out, even though she was married and had kids, walked out of her life, didn't even change her first name, but she married a new man, had
Wow.
additional kids, and through DNA, through Othram, and of course other groups,
Wow.
they were able to find out that she moved to Arkansas and started a new life. And she died in 1990. And before she died, she told one of her grandchildren, I hope nobody ever finds out the secret that I have. And she lived with this for like an additional 45 years till she died of cancer. It wasn't until February of 2024 that a police officer in Ohio, in Shelby, Ohio, Adam Turner, was able to figure this all out with DNA and everything else. And so the comparison is that there's nothing that anybody could have done in 1945 that would have changed the trajectory of that disappearance. There's nothing that could have been done. And in fact, we needed to wait until science caught up with the disappearance all these years later.
Well,
I guess what I'm saying is this kind of the same thing with Brianna, or is it something different?
No, I don't know. First of all, each case of someone disappearing is individual.
Yeah.
Yes, you can take 1,000 cases and you can say there are things that are similar with these and whatever, but each one is going to be different. And if an investigation started immediately when this person that you're referring to began immediately, they may have found her wherever she went to. They may have found her. She's not a ghost. How old was this woman when she went missing?
In her late 20s, early 30s, or something, maybe 25, something like that. She was living in Shelby, Ohio by herself. She was working for the war effort. Her husband and kids were back in West Virginia.
So that's rare.
Yeah, it is rare.
That's rare that people disappear like that. And again, Brianna was a child.
Yeah.
So
that's just the comparison. Once again, saying they knew that she went missing. They did what they could in 1945 terms. Really, nothing you could do. I don't know how you track somebody who doesn't want to be tracked.
It happens. There's cases of people voluntarily leaving. When people voluntarily leave, when you look at them, the majority of them involve some kind of mental health issue. Other ones, you'll see it with men. Men usually want to escape their family. They want to escape their wife. They want to escape their children. They want to go out and be, for lack, I better probably explain it better, but they want to be a guy. They want to run off. They want to run off.
They want their single life or something back again or something.
Yeah, they don't shirk their responsibility.
Yeah.
It happens. It's not the norm. It's not common. It's
Yeah.
it's rare.
Yeah, I did not bring Mary Jane Van Gilder up because I'm trying to say necessarily that that Brianna ran off or walked off. All I'm saying is just from an investigation point of view, given the limitations of a particular, the science or the understanding or everything, sometimes some of these disappearances, you just have to sometimes, wait for them to be solved. Sometimes.
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking with
So
Brianna. And you're giving me the impression that maybe things could have been done that might have
I would
not
think
caused
so.
this disappearance to be unsolved for 20 years. Maybe.
I think so. So whoever was responsible for this was given time to leave or fade back to normal in their life, or just change things to so that people wouldn't notice, or maybe take care of what they ever needed to fade back into their life or whatever. When you look at the fact that nobody up there has ever been able to provide anything substantial, that goes into that conversation of is a lack of evidence hypothetically. You know what I mean? Does this mean that this is a stranger abduction? Does it mean that it's someone that's not from that area? Is it someone that's a predator going into those sparsely populated areas to do something like this? You know what I mean? So that's may make your mind lean to that kind of speculation, I guess. But yeah, if somebody had been able to hop on this immediately, it seems like they would have been a better chance. And any investigator will tell you that it should work that way typically,
Okay. Let's move on to this. Just some questions right there in the outline. Any scientific proof you've been able to find to show that Brianna was murdered?
None.
Okay. Has anybody, sometimes these things happen, maybe more and more rural or urban areas, people taking credit for disappearances that maybe they didn't have anything to do with, simply to build up their street cred or something. Has anybody ever taken credit for taking Brianna, murdering Brianna, abducting Brianna, just for the heck of it, just to, like I said, build up their reputation as being a scary person? Anything that you found? That's happened.
Guy named Jorge Soto, the Joker. They called him the Joker. So he's got his own chapter in the book. But we resolved that. We kind of resolved that issue. But it's interesting. And he would tell anybody that would listen that he killed Brianna. And he said he buried her in a cornfield out behind his house near St. Albans. So yeah, there's people that came forward like that. And then there was people that came forward and pointed at people that I definitely know that this person was involved. And as you know, that the one chapter in there where a woman kind of confesses that she knows exactly what happened and tells the story.
Talking about Debbie.
Yeah, but we don't think there's any truth to it.
Okay.
Debbie and Ellen.
Okay. Yeah, right. And we're going to talk about that book. Once again, for everybody, we don't want to give away everything in the book. We're going to get to his book because we want everybody to get the book. That's why we're just kind of going over the general details, a lot more specifics. We don't want to give anything away here because, once again, it's a good book. I've read it. I think everybody should read it, but we don't want to give everything away here because then people won't get the book. And we're certainly here. I'm here to help you out. So we move on to this. Besides James, anyone else whose story has changed? Anybody, maybe I should say, who knew Brianna well? Anybody else stories who have changed over the last 20 years? Whether you want to use their names or not, up to you. But anybody kind of like James, like 3 or 4 different stories?
Nope. No.
Okay. Next question. We've, of course, talked about people seeing her car backed into the house, multiple people. In fact, eventually people started taking pictures. Did anyone ever see a car parked at the house before Brianna's car was seen wrecked there? Have you ever been able to track anybody down in that time frame between like 11:20 and I guess midnight who drove by and say, you know what, I did see a car parked there, as if somebody was waiting for somebody? Anything like that? Of course, you've tracked down a lot of people who did see the car, but did anybody actually see anybody there before Brianna's car was seen wrecked there?
No, and I think people would have picked right up on that too, because again, it wasn't someplace that people would stop.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Let's move on to this. You write about this extensively. Maura Murray, we've already talked about her a few times in this interview. You do talk about the connection possibly between Maura and Brianna, maybe just in some sentences here. You do have a suspicion that they are connected. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
So I get in a lot of trouble for this. You ready?
That's fine. It's your interview. You get to talk about what you want. So please
I get in a lot
you
of
talk
trouble.
about it in the book too. I'm here to facilitate this, please.
Let's see if I can explain this correctly. So, of course, the two disappearances have always been kind of related in people's minds, and they've been brought up together in newspaper articles, and when one is referenced, the other is usually referenced. So Maura went missing in Haverhill, New Hampshire, and I believe it's like 85 miles away from Montgomery, Vermont, where Brianna went missing. So Maura is February 9th, Brianna is March 19th. Mm-hmm. It's like 40 days or something like that. So they're both in very sparsely populated areas. Their cars are found by the side of the road, and they're gone, and they're never seen again. Both kind of crashed and abandoned and gone. So in the book, I tried to, there's so much information on both cases and so much on Maura's, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I know.
But I tried to do the best I could to just hit the highlights and to show the differences and how they're different, how they're the same, and how they're different. I don't think I maybe explained it quite as well as I could have. I would have liked to revise that chapter a little bit. Okay. But here's there's a point here I want to make, and let's see if I can do this correctly.
Go ahead.
So when Maura, for people who are familiar with Maura's and Brianna's cases, but by the way, I want to make this really clear that I don't speak for other people. I'm not speaking for Lou Barry or Bruce Maitland or anybody else. This is just my opinion. Mm-hmm. And my point of telling people this is just because I think it's worth entertaining. Okay. I'm not trying to, I just think it's worth making note of that it makes sense in some ways. Okay. So if you're familiar with Maura's case, it's very,
we covered it about a year ago here. I interviewed her sister, Julie. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Julie's great. So if you're familiar with Maura's case, if the listeners are, so Maura was attending college in Massachusetts. She in Amherst. So she contacts her in the middle of the night. She contacts her instructors and fabricates a story about a death in the family so that she can get some time off. It's obvious that's what happened later on. She ends up going to a liquor store, buying some booze, getting on the road in a car that is not trustworthy to drive. Her father had been in town to try to purchase her a vehicle. He had told her specifically, do not drive this car. They even parked it out behind in the parking lot, way in the back, out behind the school. He said, only in an emergency. Otherwise, there's no reason to drive this vehicle. She drives it north. I can't even remember what it was, maybe 150 miles or something like that.
It's a couple hours at least. Yeah, a couple hours.
Yeah. And she ends up on this, like, again, not remote, but very rural, out of the way, weird place on this windy road, spins off the road, and that's where her car is found. So she fabricates a story, leaves at an undesignated time to an undesignated destination. No one that knows her knows where she would have been going. There's nothing in her computer or phone or anything to tell where she's going. She leaves at an unpredictable time. She has an unpredictable accident, and she disappears in moments. Yeah. There is a witness that stops and says, "Are you okay? Do you need to call police?" Things like that. Yeah. She says, "No, I called AAA," which he knows isn't true because they don't give cell service. He goes up into his driveway, walks in the house, tells his girlfriend and mother to call it in, and goes back out and sits in the school bus he's driving. He's filling out a logbook, and cars are going by. And when the cops get there, she's gone. It's a very short window.
Yeah, very short time.
Yep. So then you look at Brianna, who's staying in a home with her friend and her friend's father. It's pretty, I don't know if stable is the correct word, but there's people there. They're going to work, they're going to school, they're getting up at certain hours, going to bed at certain hours. There's a stable functioning home there. She drives, 15 or 20 minutes to work, goes into a small building where the people know her. She can look outside and she can see her car. Nobody sees anything amiss. When she gets ready to leave, they ask her to stay and eat. She says, no, I got to get up for work really early in the morning. I'm going to go and get to bed. She leaves. Her car's found crashed and abandoned just down the road. 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes down the road. And she's gone, never seen again.
Sure.
So the Vermont State Police went to New Hampshire because there was outcry that these two things were related publicly. So they went, and the FBI said in on the two. So they were in New Hampshire, and they came out and they publicly gave a public release. Now, I wanted to put a picture from that into my book, and I couldn't get permission to put it in for no other reason. I just couldn't figure out who to contact to get permission for this photo. It drove me nuts. I worked on it for a long time. It was a picture of the Maitlands and Fred Murray together at this meeting outside, and they were talking to the reporters and stuff like that. But you could see how young they were at the time comparatively to now and stuff like that. And Fred was actually holding a copy of the book, The Shadow of Death, which was an unsolved serial killer that was operating in the Connecticut River Valley, which is where Maura went missing, but it was many years prior. Anyway, they come out publicly and they say, we do not believe these two things are related. There's no serial killer or anything like that. These two things are not the same. And then they said it again shortly afterwards. And then he just really didn't comment on it again after that. But here's the thing. That early on, we know exactly what they had to discuss because we know what they knew. Okay. Both stories were pretty cut and dry. I mean, we knew the facts of the stories. So when you look at Maura's, what I just explained to you, her odd set of circumstances that's absolutely baffling to everyone.
Yeah.
Then you look at Brianna's set of circumstances. They're pretty basic. Her going to work and leaving work and all that stuff. And if you look at those and hold one in each hand and you say, these two things, they are not the same, right? They are not the same. But that's like falling for a logical fallacy. That doesn't matter. A stranger abduction, he doesn't where you live, where you work, where you're going, where you're coming from, who you're involved with, if you're going to school, what your circumstances were that day. He doesn't care about any of that. All he cares about is in the moment, is the circumstances correct and conducive to what he wants to do, which is get you. That's it. He doesn't care about those things. So I absolutely entertain the fact that they could be related. Now, people will instantly say to me, you have no proof of it. I get that. So don't yell that at me. People will shout it in the comments. You don't have any proof. I get that. I understand it absolutely entirely. What I'm telling you is it's worth entertaining. People will instantly say they're not related because of A, B, and C, and D. There's no way of knowing. It's interesting that they're in sparsely populated North Country areas. They're, as far as someone that's a predator and is out trolling for victims, they're not that far apart. I also find it very interesting that there was someone that was caught, convicted, and sent to prison for abducting and murdering a woman south of there. When this took place, professionals all said this is not his first time. Nobody said where's the other victims. They just moved on. They moved. He went to prison and they moved on. Not one person said, we got two really high-profile missing persons cases up north. Granted, it was a ways away. I get that. But there's something that you miss when you kind of look at Vermont. Vermont has less people in the whole state than the Albany, New York area.
It does. It's very small.
Yeah. If you're not used to it, it's weird. It's kind of a cool thing. When you're there, it's very, I don't know how to put it. You can go into towns. It's like you're stepping back in time. The little hamlets and stuff.
Yeah.
but it's kind of neat that they're all close knit, that they all know each other, and there's a certain bonding there. And the people there are really kind of fiercely independent. You know what I mean? And you know, when you look at the fact that you call a cop and it may be 20 minutes or 45 minutes till they get to your house.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain attitude that people take where you got to take care of yourself, and they all understand that. And so it's, you know, I'm not putting it down. It's just different. But to think that it's out of someone's stretch that someone's going to go, a predator is going to go trolling in these different areas, this isn't beyond the realm of comprehension. It happens. We see it again and again and again. I think
And you actually bring up somebody toward the end of your book who you at least one person that you think is a pretty good choice.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So there's a whole chapter on predators, and there's a, you know, looking back, I wish I had extended some of that too. When I wrote it, a few people came to me and said, that had written books. They said, you really want to set it down and walk away from it for 6 months before you publish it, because you're going to go back and you're going to read it and you're going to go, okay, I want to add stuff. And I'm like, I don't have that opportunity where I'm going to just set a book aside for 6 months and go about my way. This is a project I'm on. I'm going to finish it, you know. But if I had done that, there were some things I could have really expanded on. And that was one of them. So Brianna had, you know, Brianna's really close friend had said a man had come into the inn and spoke to her. And he had said, he had expressed that he liked her. And she kind of expressed the fact she kind of liked him too. He was older and she thought he might be from Canada. Now, I don't know what she's basing that on. She's a 17-year-old kid. But that's all she knows. Now, in order for Brianna, for this to happen to her, when she got in her car and she drove away, and she drives 2 minutes up the road and has whatever takes place there, and she's gone. Nobody came up to her at 11:20 at night when she leaves there, saw her in another vehicle and said, there's a girl alone, I'm going to abduct her. You know, they had to be waiting. This had to be a plan. Could have very easily happened. There's a church kind of kitty corner there, and it's kind of like just a little neighborhood. They could have waited for her to leave. She's in a very distinct vehicle. They see her vehicle there. They know she's leaving. She's got to be leaving sometime soon. It's getting near the end of the night. They're just going to sit and wait. Now, we don't know what transpired, but that particular person is interesting that they would say that. And, you know, I was looking back. This is another thing I didn't know prior to publishing the book. I found a newspaper article that had that exact information in it, and it was early on that her friend said someone spoke to her at the end. Either way, okay. My point is that I believed that it was not from someone from that area. I believed that it was someone that had come in there and met her somehow, whether it was at the diner or it was at the inn. Now, if that person met her at the diner in the early morning hours when she was, you know, waiting tables, she was training to wait tables as in the breakfast. If she had talked to someone and someone said, "Oh, do you like your job?" She was the type of person that would have said, "Yeah, I got 2 jobs. I worked at Lantern too," you know. And she's driving this vehicle. It's really noticeable. So it wouldn't be a big issue to try to go spot her there.
So what you're saying is you really, really, really entertain the idea that Maura's and Brianna's disappearances are connected.
Really. I entertain them
maybe
for sure.
more,
and, you know,
maybe more than the average person. But you, once again, you're the experienced. Maybe you haven't worked on Maura's, of course. You know it. You've met, maybe you've met Julie. Have talked to Julie. Everything. You're an expert on Brianna's disappearance. Maybe not as much on Maura's, but you see enough connections between them to really make you lean in that direction.
Well, we actually do work for the Murrays, and we have for quite a while. But I'm not speaking for Lou or anybody else or whatever. And I'm not. Okay. What I'm saying is that, and you look at Maura's disappearance too. The locals there, they have just tapped that to try to get information forever.
Okay.
And I get in trouble because you know, people that discuss on her Facebook page, I think they took what I said kind of a little bit wrong, but there's a lot of information that gets gone over ad nauseum. I think that just it's minutia. It's the information that you need just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the piece of the puzzle to finish the puzzle just isn't there. Yeah. It's not something you can look at that information forever, and I don't think it's going to be productive. It's just, you need to have it. You need to have all that information, but it's not what's going to resolve this. That it's somewhere outside of there.
Okay.
A local did this, and they were alone, and they have the fortitude to keep this to themselves. They could, you know the deal. You've done enough of these.
Yeah.
They can keep it to themselves till they die.
Absolutely.
You know, we just had. Are you familiar with Bill Thomas? That does.
I covered I covered the Colonial Parkway disappearances and murders the end of 2022. So I've spoken to him like over email. I've never talked to him on the phone or over Zoom, but we've had some email exchanges. Yeah.
Okay. Well, they had a man who died that they realized was responsible for a couple of those.
For two of those, yes. Yes.
I'm not very up on it.
David and Robin are the underage, the 14-year-old and the 20-year-old. David Nobbling and Robin, I forget her last name, but those were the two that they've proven through DNA. Yeah. Yes.
So the point is, though, that guy took it to his grave, right?
He did.
He didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew. He operated alone and whatever. So, I mean, if that's the case with Brianna, and if that's the case with Maura, it's one of those situations. Again, you may never know. Yeah. I think in his case, how did they come up with that DNA? I forgot. In his case,
they had it from back then, and then he was connected to another murder. Remember, he murdered somebody else, another woman, and they just eventually A equals C, B equals C, so A equals C type of situation.
But
I think
they couldn't do it till he died, till he passed away or something. Was he a suspect? Was he a suspect?
I'm forgetting. You put me a little on the spot. I'm forgetting right at this moment. But
yeah. Well, I think it might have been he was a suspect. So when he died, they took his DNA or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he died way back in 2016. You'd think that would have been done. It was. I don't know. It's a good question. I probably should know this off the top of my head. I don't, but it just seems to me it had something though to do with this other murder, this woman murder that if I guess what I'm saying, had he not murdered her, maybe they would have never connected him to these two murders. I think possibly.
So what, you know, again, that's what are the chances kind of thing, right? So, and when you speak of what are the chances kind of thing and stuff like that. So the one death in the book, do you remember the boy named Craig Jackman? Okay. Craig Jackman was killed by Timothy Cruz.
Yeah.
5 years later, a man stumbled upon Craig Jackman's skull and he brought it home with him. He called the police. They went out, they did this professional dig. They found a lot of bones, the majority of his bones, and some clothing and stuff like that. Had that man not stumbled upon that skull in 76% forested Vermont, you know, Cruz never would have been held responsible for that.
For sure.
And he would have gone on to do whatever he would have done, right? So we don't know. There's a lot of things to play here. All I'm saying, I guess, is that it's worth entertaining.
Okay. All right. That's your professional opinion. You know, of course, like you said, you're an expert on Brianna's. You have experience with Maura's. This is kind of a conclusion that you say, you know what? This is something that really needs to be considered.
It's absolutely should be considered.
Okay.
For sure. And there's no proof of it, obviously. There's no proof of that. And, you know, I want those people to know, I don't know if they'll be listening to the podcast or not.
Right now, first of all, what is the title of the book? And before we get into it, where can people get it? How can they buy a copy? What's the title? Where can they get it? Before we talk, just going to ask you a few questions about your writing and everything. But what's the title? Where can they get it?
It's called The Hunt for Brianna Maitland, and it's only sold through my publisher. So if you Google the title, it'll come up. My publisher, small publisher, great people, really want. And if you go to this guy's store, he's an author. He's written some fantastic books on crimes in the Adirondacks. One of them was The Escape from Dannemora. Prison Break, which was wild, and Robert Garrow. It's called Terror in the Adirondacks. It was a serial killer back in the 70s who terrorized the Adirondacks, and he was in Syracuse and stuff too. He ended up escaping from Fishkill prison. But yeah, you can get it from him. I mean, if you go on his site, it'll list the stores too that it's sold at in Vermont. Or you can just send me a message on Facebook, and I'll send you a signed copy if you purchase it directly from me. Yeah.
Great. All right. So The Hunt for Brianna Maitland, and you just do a Google search for that, or you can find Greg on Facebook or whatever if you want to get a signed copy if they want one.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's talk just a little bit about what motivated you after so many years. You didn't write this book like in 2008. This is something more recently. What was the final deciding factor that said, you know what, I think it's time?
I had talked about it for a while, and when the pandemic hit, I was really isolated. I mean, really bad. So my brother said, you got to do it now. You've got time. You've got the material. You know what you want to write. So I did. I just took it up as a project. Gave me something to do. Kind of stuck at home 24/7 for months and months and months on end. And it was an experience.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. But I think it needed to be done just to dispel some rumors and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I thought so.
How long did it take you to do from the day you actually made? For me, I've written some books. I have, of course, my Unfound books, but I've written some novels and things going back many, many, many years. Me, I'm more of an outline guy. Here's what I'm good. Here's the outline for the book, and then I sit down to write it. Kind of the same thing, or is this more of a stream of conscious? How much did you plan out?
I knew the story so well. I think that was the thing. I knew the story so well that I just knew what I would want to tell people if I was going to, if when people ask me about it, I'll say it's such a long story. You got a week, and they're like, oh, and I said, I'll say reference this or reference that, and then let me know what questions you have. Now, with the book, I'm like, okay, if I was going to tell somebody this story, this is what I would do, and that's how I wrote it. But I had like paperwork strewn everywhere around my house. Luckily, I live alone, and so I could just come back in the house and just refer right to it and just start fresh and or start where I left off and just go, and I wanted it to be all fact, and so that when people read it, they knew they learned something. If they wanted the truth and they wanted to know the deal, this was where you were going to get it from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right. And so it came out last year, 2023. It came out last year, correct?
Yeah. September 15th. Yeah. Right. I don't even know how long it took me. I didn't even keep track. Okay. But I mean, it wasn't a long time. I just hammered away at it.
Okay, very good. Once again, The Hunt for Brianna Maitland. Google it to get it from the publisher. You have a small publisher who has published it for you. But if you'd like to get a signed copy from Greg, you can try to track him down on Facebook. I know he has his own, his private Facebook page. And maybe you can reach him that way if you'd like to get a signed copy from him. Of course, people do that for some of the books that I've written as well. So please, everybody, go check that out. The Hunt for Brianna Maitland, written by today's guest, Greg Overacker. One more question, and then we'll get into all the social media stuff. Question: now that you've been working on this for 18 years, why has Brianna's disappearance captured so much more attention than most quote unquote regular people's disappearances? You've been in this, you've been living this for 18 years. Your best opinion on that?
We never saw it that way. We were always like, why did Maura's case get so much more attention? Yeah. Well, I think I have that answer. I think I have that answer. Initially, the police said, Brianna was involved in drug activity in Franklin County. And I think consciously and subconsciously, people just said, oh, it's a drug thing. And they moved on from that. And the mystery was kind of gone, you know what I mean? But the attention it's gotten at this point after all these years is because we just don't let it go. Mm-hmm. We've gone out and done the work, and we've been on podcasts, and we've put out a book and been on shows, and Lou goes out and does podcasts too, and we did some together. So yeah, we've kept it that way. And the family's built this relationship with the police, and they've done rewards and press releases and stuff like that. So it's work. That's why it's that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
How can people reach you? Of course, we already talked about your personal Facebook page if they want to get the book, but there is a Facebook page set up for Brianna's disappearance, website, maybe your email address or somebody. If somebody has some information they want to contact you, maybe you want to give out all of that right now.
So my email's in the book. It's in the beginning of the book. If anybody wants to contact me, it says if you want to contact the author, it's Hopsicker, HOPSICKER @gmail.com.
Okay.
You can go to Private Investigations for the Missing website, which is a very cool website, and see all the cool work they do. And you can always reach out to someone and get my information from there. It's not actually listed on there, but anyone would answer you, tell you how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
If you look me up on Facebook, all I can tell you is I'm not a big Facebook guy, but I can tell you that my picture there is Black Sabbath. It's a picture of a Black Sabbath album with a little flying devil angel there. What else? Lou is the administrator of one of the Brianna Facebook pages. I'm not even sure what the exact name of it is, to be honest with you. There's 3 of them, but
okay. Wow.
You reach out on there, somebody will get a hold of me. You certainly can get a hold of me on there. Yeah.
Okay. Greg, any final words before we complete this interview?
I don't think so. I appreciate you having me on. This was a great interview, and I love when people read the book and give me some feedback. There's a lot of followers of Maura's case that have read it. Got a lot of good feedback from them, and she's got some really steadfast army there.
Yeah,
working on her behalf, and Brianna does too. Brianna's got a lot of followers too, people that are really. And there's kind of a crossover there, which is really cool.
It is. Yeah.
And
okay.
It's nice. It's nice that there's all these people out there that want the same result.
Right.
We're working on
it. Given that I cover so many disappearances where so many missing people don't have armies like that.
Yeah.
We wish everybody there was a book like you've written about Brianna. We wish there was a book written about for all these disappearances. Just as an example, just doesn't happen.
That was kind of a thing with the organization that Bruce Maitland set up, Private Investigations for the Missing. That started years ago with him and I talking. We'd be together, and just having dinner or something, and I would say, people can't afford. How would you ever afford this? Because I did it for expenses only. Still do for 18 years. And we were like, we got to start a nonprofit. He ended up doing it, and it's helping tons of people. And it's just an amazing thing that would come out of this. Yeah. Okay. It's been a long road, man. It's been a long. There's something that people should know is that with us and the police, we're always working on this. I can call Lou almost any day of the week and say, what's new? And he'll tell me something that he did on Brianna's case or Maura's. And it's not inconsequential stuff. If he's making phone calls, he's setting up interviews, he'll call me. Are you ready? Let's go Saturday. Well, I'll pick him up. We'll get a hotel room. We'll start asking questions. We're knocking on doors. There's a ton of stuff that people don't see that happens. There's a ton of motion. We don't know all the stuff that the police does. We know some of it.
All right.
But they will tell you, you don't know what you don't know. And they've done a lot of work on it. So there's just a lot of stuff that, I would love to at some point expand on my book and just add to it and as time goes by. And there's so much stuff I'd like to add to it now. And there's so many experiences, and there's so many people that we've talked to. There's so much open-ended stuff where we'll sit down and we'll go, do you remember the interview with this person and this person? We're very familiar, and this person. Yeah, there's nothing evidence to connect these people. They came to us as tips or whatever. But unfortunately, we're in that weird situation of, well, you can't rule them out. And man, some of this is convincing stuff, really convincing stuff, It's the same thing with Maura's. There's people that come up to us, they're on our radar, and you're like, this is compelling. But there's no evidence of anything. And pieces are missing. And that's stuff that's never made public. So it's mind bending at times, you know?
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot to think about all the time, and to try. And as time goes on, it gets bigger and bigger sometimes. Yeah.
Greg, I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome. I feel like I made a new friend, buddy.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you for appearing. And that was my May 7th, 2024 interview with Greg Overacker, longtime private investigator for the Maitland family. I thank him for joining me and all of you on this episode on both audio and video. There have been many map videos made concerning Brianna's disappearance. Even so, I've made my own. Please find it on Unfound's YouTube channel. Before I get into my long summation, I want to remind all of you as to what Greg said about the Maitland family being asked to go on some of those daytime talk shows. The shows requested that the family had to act a certain way. In fact, just about insisting that the family cry. This is the exact reason I've counseled my guests to never go on those shows, ever. And for all of you, stop watching them. Dr. Phil, all of them. You are being manipulated. These are not good people running these shows. Okay, now my summation, and I don't know how long this will go. And given its length, I'm just using notes and not reading from the screen, so please bear with the you knows, etc. As you would expect, I've been reading a lot of analysis on Brianna's disappearance over the past couple of weeks. Web sleuths, blogs, Greg's own book, newspaper accounts going back to 2004, 2005. A lot of reading because a lot of coverage has been done on her disappearance over the past 20 years, unlike a lot of disappearances that we have featured on Unfound. So for my own analysis, I'm going to use what I know best, Unfound's own disappearances, and some of the conclusions about missing people that I've deduced from them. And I hope this will assist you with your own analysis. First and foremost, disappearances are about people, not circumstances. If you give me the background of a missing person, addict or not, rich or poor, mental health issues or not, kinds of relationships, education, on and on and on, just from those items, the most probable reason for a person's disappearance can be predicted to a high degree of certainty. How can we apply this theory to Brianna? Well, there are warning signs. No constant home. Dropped out of school. That's a big one. Drug use all around her. Recent breakup with James. The dust up with her friend Keely. In fact, overall, seemingly, she was surrounded by a bunch of losers. Had only started the jobs she had recently, although I will note that she was only 17. Yep, I know she loved her family. They were close. I don't doubt that. However, we also have to remember that parents are committing suicide all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't love their children. And I think we all learned quite a bit when we found out about what happened to Mary Jane Van Gilder, who was married, had children, but disappeared in 1945, only for Adam Turner to find out here in the 21st century, in February of 2024, that Mary Jane found a new husband and had new children and lived with it till her death in 1990. That doesn't mean she didn't love her first children. Remember that. Overall, regarding who Brianna was as a person, she falls into a category where running off becomes a real possibility. Still percentage-wise, low. but still much, much higher than kids who don't have anything in the above list going on. Well then, I guess that means she staged her disappearance. She ran her own car into the house. Brianna put the lime on the trunk. She ripped up her own necklace, left the doors open, left the lights on, all of it. Well, maybe, but it's not that simple. Going back through Unfound's catalog of now 330 disappearances, I can only cite 4 where the belief is that the missing people or person staged their own disappearances. 4 out of 330. That's only just over 1%. Which ones are they? Gregory Howells, Flight 370, Dale Kerstetter, and maybe Bernard Rusness and Peggy McKay. That's it. To make sure we're all clear here, what exactly do I mean by staged? That the missing people themselves did things, actions, and or statements to mislead friends and family and then investigators as to what actually happened. This is in contrast to when husbands say, yeah, my wife took off with somebody I don't know in a white truck. That is a different kind of staging. That is being done by a third party, not by the missing person himself or herself. And to clarify, the staging by the missing person has to be overt, not just a car being left on a logging road or something. And we certainly have that with the scene at the abandoned house. Well then, I guess since the percentage is so low, that there's hardly any chance that Brianna could have staged her own disappearance. But wait. You have to remember something about the way this podcast goes about its business. A disappearance has to be a year old to be featured in it. In addition, and probably more importantly, the average age of a disappearance on Unfound is between 20 and 22 years old, so right around the age that Brianna's disappearance is. In addition to both those facts, as a guy who reads missing persons news every day, probably once a month, I do read a story about somebody who tried to fake his or her disappearance but did not succeed. Thus, my perception is maybe this isn't as uncommon as Unfound's own stats might show. Well, how could that be? Well, it is possible that the reason Unfound has only featured 4 staged by the actual missing persons themselves disappearances is because all the other people who tried it failed. Maybe in the first month, the 6th month, the first year, the 5th year, whenever. Meaning, yes, the successful attempts at people staging their own disappearances that stayed unresolved to the point that Unfound can feature them is just 1%. However, the overall attempts, failed or not, is a much, much higher percentage. In a nutshell, people attempting to stage their own disappearances is more common than Unfound's stats may show, due to Unfound only featuring unsolved disappearances, not botched staged ones. Overall, no matter how you look at it, staged disappearances by the missing people themselves is a very small sliver of the overall entire disappearance pie. Well then, that settles it. Somebody abducted her that night. See, that's not clear either. Why? Going back to Unfound's catalog, and I should state, I do believe that Unfound's entire 330 repertoire of disappearances is a random sample of disappearances that occur. Of course, we mostly cover disappearances in the United States. But myself, my assistants, other people out there who bring families to me and introduce me to families, I'm not looking for particular types of disappearances. As everybody knows, I will talk to anybody and any type of person, as long as I believe that person is being honest, is welcome to come on Unfound. So that is why I believe that we have a random sample of disappearances. And it very well may be, we may be off on the gender percentage or ethnicity or race, anything like that, but that's not planned. This has just been how randomly it has happened. And yes, I do believe, due to that Unfound's catalog of disappearances can be used for scientific and statistical purposes. And I will remind you, even in a country of 330 million people, all that pollster has to do is poll 100 random likely voters, and that pollster has a pretty good chance of predicting who the next president of the United States would be. So 100 people out of 330 million, I realize only adults can vote, so let's say 250 million. So 100 out of 250 million people, if you poll them, you have a pretty good chance of determining who the next president will be. Well, we've featured 330 disappearances on Unfound, and at least in the United States, there are considered to be 100,000 unsolved disappearances. So if those pollsters are using science, statistical science, then we here at Unfound are surely using statistical science too. So, going back to Unfound's catalog, once again, 330 disappearances, in which about 10% of those have been resolved at this point. I picked out females' disappearances that were most likely abductions. Well, how do I define abduction? I define it this way. Where there is ample reason to believe a female was forcibly taken away from wherever she is to be killed elsewhere, meaning she wasn't lured away. She didn't choose to go with her abductor or abductors or the people or the group or whoever. In addition, there is no scientific evidence to think she was killed in her own home, car, apartment, etc., wherever the abduction started, then transported elsewhere, already deceased. This definition rules out one of the most common types of disappearances featured on Unfound. And that type is females killed under their own roofs or roofs by the men in their lives who also live there. There are 16 unfound disappearances that meet this general criteria of abduction. Yes, I think a much lower number than many of you would think. We've featured the disappearances of 189 females, so women and girls, on Unfound. So only about 8% were abductions. That's it. So somewhat rare. The names of those females: Susie Lyle, Regina Marie Boss, Linda K. Carroll, Debbie Lowe, Evelyn Hartley, Mikkel Biggs, Kimberly Raymer, Dorianne Myers, Tiffany Johnson, Julie Weflin, Unique Harris, Jody Husentrut, Pearl Pinson, Brenda Condon, Angela Freeman, Paige Renkowski. There are some things about this list, though, that need to be understood. Out of that 16, there's reason to believe that at least 10 of them knew their attackers well. Lyle, Boss, Carroll, Lowe, Raymer, Myers, Johnson, Weflin, Harris, and Freeman. And really, there's only 2 where we can say for sure that the females didn't know their attackers at all before the abductions happened. That would be Paige Renkowski and Pearl Pinson. Also, of that 16, 6 are underage, at least by U.S. standards, like Brianna was. Lowe, Hartley, Biggs, Raymer, Pinson, Freeman. In addition, the idea I got from Greg in the interview, his best insight, is that there is reason to believe Brianna at least had casual knowledge of her abductor, a guy who had come into her workplace looking for her. Meaning Brianna's disappearance should most likely be put with the remaining 4 on the preceding list: Hartley, Biggs, Husentrut, Condon. So coincidentally, we come down to that 4 number, just like we did with staged disappearances. That was not planned. In a nutshell, out of 189 female disappearances featured on Unfound, only 4, excluding Brianna's, is most likely an abduction by a person or group the woman or girl casually knew. That's it. Granted, if you think James caused Brianna's disappearance, then Brianna could be put in with Susie Lyle and that group. Still, it's only 10, In addition, if you're wondering how many of those 16 abductions had situations where the victims' vehicles were left in odd locations, granted some of these were little girls so they couldn't drive, but the answer is 4, although a different 4. Myers, Weflin, Freeman, Rinkowski. My point on this is, yes, I think most people somehow inherently understand that staged disappearances by the missing people themselves are rare. However, what I think the public doesn't appreciate is how rare disappearances are in which a man abducted a female he barely knew, and that case lasted unsolved for over 20 years. And do males get abducted? Stevie Hammerly and Joe Grashner had that happen to them. We just recently covered their disappearances. So they do, but at a much lower rate than women and girls, according to Unfound's stats. What neither of these statistical examinations cover is this. Factually, it is possible that Brianna drove to somebody's house after work. Something of a violent nature happened there, I guess within minutes of her arriving, and then that killer or killers backed her car into that house to make it look like Brianna did it or something. There's not one fact to dispute that possibility. Yeah, I know, crazy, but hey, never say never. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.